In this exciting episode of the Perry Pod, if you get divorced from the woman you love because of your loathsome stepson, there's still hope. It just may involve that stepson getting murdered, your ex getting charged with the crime, and Perry getting him off. But hey, it might confirm you love your ex-husband. It's just that simple. Season 1, Episode 36 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Prodigal Parent. Welcome to the Perry Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy. My purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired, and each episode I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the Law Library, we return to prior cases to refresh our memories about Perry's past, so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. The case of the prodigal parent features a Perry couple in reverse. The Harrisons, who were once married and in love, are now divorced, but still love each other. A quick journey to the Law Library reveals that nearly every episode features at least one happy couple, but what about divorces? Harry Merrill and Helene Cheney didn't break up amicably in The Case of the Restless Redhead. Neither did Peter and Doris Cole in The Case of the Sleepwalker's Niece. Rita Bradford divorced the no-good-nick Joe Bradford in The Case of the Crooked Candle, but might find happiness with Paul.
Rita Bradford. Rita Wassell. The divorce held up. Well, she came to my office to consult me professionally this afternoon. After all, there's a year and a half in her life she wants to find out about.
And if you can't help her recapture her past?
Yeah. Least I can do is to brighten up her future.
In the case of the fan dancer's horse, Lois Fenton's desire to get divorced from John Calendar is one reason she's arrested for his murder. In the case of the cautious coquette, Elaine Barton can't get her ex, Harry Pitkin, out of her hair until he winds up dead. Whether or not Dr. Morris and Janet Morris are actually divorced, depends on whether you're in Mexico or the United States, is a key legal conundrum at the heart of the case of the fugitive nurse.
Your Honor, Dr. Morris is no longer the husband of the defendant. He now resides in Boca de Oro, Mexico. On March 4th of this year, he obtained a divorce, and that divorce is legal where he now resides.
But it is not legal in the state of California.
He doesn't live in California.
It makes no difference.
Gentlemen.
Helen Reed's ex-husband winds up dead in the case of the deadly double. Fred and Rose Calvert were separated in the case of the daring decoy, not divorced. He's paid the mortgage and everything. The State Department's Ralph Davis wants to split with Mary Kay in the case of the screaming woman. That doesn't end up well. And Lucille and Bertie Allred were headed toward divorce court in the case of the lazy lover before Bertie Allred came down with a little case of murder. Note to LA actuarial table gurus: do not insure the divorced or soon to be divorced. They're dropping like flies. Now, without further ado, let's get to the plot of our episode. The Case of the Prodigal Parent. Philip Larkin is a no-good dirty heel, a sexual harassment suit waiting to happen. As the episode begins, he's terrorizing a secretary in his business, Lorraine Stevens, who made the wise move of breaking up with him.
Suppose I come over to your place at about 7:30.
I told you, Philip. I'm not going out with you anymore.
Oh, come on. You don't really mean that?
Their split was apparently over some dirty speculations Philip made. Now Philip is threatening to use the dirt he's dug up to force her to be with him. Yuck.
Why do you keep after me like this?
Because I want you, and if I can't have you, nobody else will. Do you understand?
Our poor embattled secretary can't catch a break. She's sent on a wild goose chase, and when she tries to call her boss, George Durrell, for clarification, the boss's wife assumes Lorraine is George's mistress.
Is that what they call them nowadays?
What?
You're not fooling me. I know what you and my husband are up to. What's the matter? Isn't it enough that you see him all day at the office without hounding him at home?
Her next phone call isn't really answered because Philip the Schnookneck is dead while an older man traipses around in the dark around the body. The man turns out to be Philip's former stepfather, the recently divorced husband of Philip's mother, played by Fay Wray.
Are you Philip Larkin's stepfather?
I was. His mother and I are divorced.
Then what are you doing here?
I came to see Mrs. Harrison. Is there anything wrong with that?
Come on in.
The stepfather, Joseph Harrison, gets arrested for the murder, but in a surprising turn, his ex-wife believes he's innocent and enlists Perry to help get him off.
Do you think your husband killed Philip?
He said he didn't.
Do you believe him?
I have finished with not believing him, Mr. Mason.
What does that mean?
I believe now that Joseph was tolerant and patient, much beyond what I could have expected. Will you?
As the title indicates, the case hinges on Lorraine Stevens' real parents. Philip believed his stepfather was Lorraine's dad. Well, we know who the mother is, Miss Calaro, George Durrell's secretary who got Lorraine her job.
Are you the mother of Lorraine Stevens?
Yes, I am Lorraine's mother. All of her life I've denied her. And then she came here. But she is a fine young lady. She is courageous and loyal.
Lorraine's father? That just happens to be our murderer, George Durrell.
You're absolutely right, Mr. Mason. All her life, Irene has protected someone. I killed Philip Larkin, Your Honor. I felt I should do my share of protecting. I wanted to protect the daughter I couldn't call my own.
Lorraine's boss and the husband of the super jealous wife who was paralyzed in a car wreck because of his accident, Durrell gave his daughter an alibi, then offed her harasser. No novel for this episode. The screenwriters tried to adapt the case of the dubious bridegroom. They do a better job in season 2. And things went sideways real quick. Nothing to report here other than you can read one chapter of The Dubious Bridegroom and figure, yep, they must have come up with something different. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is something about a particular character in the story. And a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul this week concerns voir dire examination. When Hamilton springs the film clip on Perry in court, Perry reserves this right.
I would like to reserve the privilege of voir dire examination for the purpose of determining whether these films are relevant.
The privilege is granted.
What exactly is voir dire examination? Well, the phrase is French for speaking the truth. Most often gets applied to jury selection. So here's our Paul prompt. Who would Perry be examining to figure out the relevance of these home movies? How exactly is Perry using the phrase? Our Della this week is Ethel Harrison, played by the Hollywood's original scream queen herself, Fay Wray.
Then when I heard they had arrested Joseph and charged him with murder, I thought I should consult an attorney.
Wray was born in 1907 to Mormon parents living in Alberta, Canada. She moved to the States, Utah to be exact, before she was 10, and moved out to Hollywood as a teen. After getting started in silent movies including one with Hollywood legend Erich von Stroheim. Ray made sound pictures with RKO, where she starred alongside Joel McCrea in The Most Dangerous Game, and alongside King Kong in, well, King Kong.
Throw your arms across your eyes and scream, man. Scream for your life.
The year Kong came out, 1933, Ray became a naturalized U.S. citizen. Ray continued to star in film and television roles until her retirement in 1980, and she appears in 2 more Perry episodes. We'll see her again in Season 2. She died in 2004 at the age of 96. Our Perry this week involves our intrepid hero's sense of his clients' emotional lives. Typically, Perry relies on Della to tell him that a woman loves a man. This episode, Perry susses out the truth concerning Ethel Harrison's feelings for her ex.
I don't know how much of her story to believe, or how much she's left out. She's still in love with a man she's divorced.
Looks like Della's emotional intelligence is rubbing off. The theme for this episode is parenting. The title's description fits both Joseph Harrison and George Durrell. One gets charged with murder, and the other actually committed it. After divorcing his wife, Joseph Harrison went to a sanitarium 1,000 miles away from Los Angeles, trying to get away from a relationship gone bad. When the prodigal returns, he discovers his dead stepson's body and finds himself charged for his murder. The other parent is George Durrell, a man who is spiritually prodigal, physically proximate to his daughter every single day, and yet unable to acknowledge her. He had a child out of wedlock with Irene Colaro, his partner's secretary, and has never been able to acknowledge his child. He is married to an emotionally broken, wheelchair-bound woman that his own driving put there. Perry talks about Durrell's decision to murder Larkin and give Lorraine an alibi as his one good act of parenting. Last week I mentioned how child and parent bonds could supersede marriage ties in Perry Mason's world. Wow, this episode might just be the exception that proves the rule. Now it's time for a Perry proverb. Perry gets taken surprise in court when Hamilton Berger shows a home movie of Joseph Harrison punching his stepson. So Perry confronts Harrison about the evidence, but Harrison won't tell him what the fight was about. Here's Perry's reaction.
You're a mighty stubborn man.
Yes, I guess you're right.
Who are you protecting? This little bit of gallantry may cost you your life.
Note, Perry believes Joseph Harrison is innocent, but Perry's trust has to be reciprocated. If the client is willing to hide behind gallant gestures rather than give Perry the chance to expose the truth, the client may just end up having to lie in the bed he's made for himself, one made with the electric chair. Now let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand.
Go on, Paul.
Our research prompt from last episode asked about Pierre-Auguste Renoir's Girl with the Watering Can, a print of which was hanging on the wall of Bernice Archer, the girlfriend of Bob Fleetwood. The 1876 portrait of the as-yet unidentified girl is considered a classic Impressionist portraiture. The original has hung in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. since the 1950s. And in the 1950s, 3 different coffee table books from the National Gallery featured prints of the painting. According to a 2011 story in the Washington Times, the painting is one of the National Gallery's most popular holdings. 4,500 postcard prints of it were sold every year. That number was down to 4,000 as of 2017, but that's still a lot of postcards. My Aunt Myra did some research too, noting that the NGA, the National Gallery, said the portrait became popular because the child is pretty and innocent. no shadows in the painting, and that Renoir started painting children and women because he was broke and needed money. I love this. Her hypothesis is that Bernice Archer liked the painting because it was the opposite of her shadowy, dark relationship with her boyfriend. My guess is that it just tells us Bernice's aesthetic taste is fine, but it's super conventional, just like her relationship with Bob. Pretty conventional for Perryland. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode or the podcast in general. Was there something about this episode you'd like to comment on or something you'd like to correct? You can leave comments on the pod's website at theperrypod.libsyn.com or email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find those links in the show notes. All PerryPod episodes are available via Spotify and YouTube as well as iTunes. Thanks again for joining me on this pod journey. Join us next time where we see our first two-time defendant. She's got a different hair color. It's the case of the black-eyed blonde. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!